And one man who absolutely knows it back to front is our next guest, who's David Spencer, former Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Inspector and Policy Exchange's Head of Crime and Justice. Now, Policy Exchange, you may have heard of them, are a very influential, probably the most influential think tank actually in Westminster. And David's been working with a guy called Peter Clarke, who is the former Chief Inspector of Prisons. And I understand, David, you've been providing a forensic examination of the crisis in criminal justice. You've talked about a public safety time bomb. What is that public safety time bomb, David?
Morning, Peter. Well, this stretches across pretty much every aspect of the criminal justice system now. So we are seeing suspects of crimes taking much longer to be charged. We are seeing the court backlog, particularly in the Crown Courts, bigger than they've ever been before. And of course, you will have seen that the prison system is pretty much filter bursting. So what we're seeing now is nothing less, as we say in the report, a public safety time bomb.
Okay, and what do we do to try to arrest that?
Well, what we've looked at, particularly at Policy Exchange in the research that we've been doing, is looking at the role of prolific offenders in the system. So here we're talking about people with a large number of criminal convictions. And just to give you a flavour of what that looks like, about 0.5% of the population receive about 50% of criminal convictions. So actually the number of people committing crimes in this country is much, much smaller than you might even imagine. Certainly those doing the bulk of those crimes.
So it's these prolific offenders, this small number of people who are actually doing committing most of the crime.
That's right. That's right. And what we found particularly is that certainly last year, in just over half of those cases, when they got convicted of a more serious crime, so an either-way offence or an indictable offence, as it's called in the system.
What's an either-way offence? What's that?
So this is the sort of thing, so it might be possession with intent to supply drugs, it might be certain types of theft, it might even be a burglary. So they're sort of the mid-tier of criminal offences, but nonetheless have a really significant impact on the victims.
And why is it called an either-way offence? What does that come into? Sorry, I just haven't heard that phrase before.
No worries. So it's basically, it means that it can be tried either in the magistrate's court or in the Crown Court with a judge and a jury. So it's a bit of a technical sort of thing, but it defines how serious the crimes are. It's an easy way of defining how the crimes are. And what we found was that when these hyper-prolific offenders were convicted of another criminal offence, that only in less than half of cases did they get sent to prison. And so these people have got over 45 previous convictions. They get convicted of another criminal offence, and they stay out of prison. And we found that fairly remarkable. We think that the public would think that was fairly remarkable as well.
Some of these delays are really astonishing as well. It now takes an average, you have found in your report, it now takes an average of nearly 44 days compared to 14 days 7 years ago for the Crown Prosecution Service to charge a suspect, not to go through the whole system, but to charge someone, to decide, are we going to charge this person or not? That's ludicrous.
That's right. And what we've seen over recent years is that number, as you say, has gone from 14 days to 44. That's the average. And the reality is this has a real life effect, because these people may well be suspected of committing very, very serious crimes, and yet they are out there walking amongst us without the CPS having reviewed the case material, so they don't get a court date. So what we're seeing is right at the front end of the system, these backlogs are almost just being built into the system, and it has got worse and worse and worse over the last few years. And it's important to notice this was getting worse before the pandemic started.
And is it because the pandemic is often used as a big excuse? I mean, do you throw money at this? Do you throw resources? Do you recruit a load more people in the court system, the police, etc.? I mean, what is the way, if you were advising the next government, whether it's Labour or Conservative administration, what would your sort of top tip be to try to turn the super tanker here?
It is inevitable that money is going to be part of the solution, but it is important to know it's only part of the solution. So as an example, certainly our assessment around the Crown Prosecution Service charging timelines, that actually what's going on here is just a huge amount of bureaucratic I don't want to say nonsense, but a huge amount of extra...
You must have found that when you were a copper yourself, David. You must have been banging your head against a brick wall with all of the obstacles to actually just catching criminals.
That's right, and it's got worse. I think that's the key thing that's become really clear. When we speak to frontline officers, we look at the data, it's very, very clear that things have got worse since my time.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, David Spencer, there, former Metropolitan Police Detective Chief Inspector. He's also the head of crime and justice at Policy Exchange, the think tank.